Greetings, Mr. Del Prado's biology students. It's Mr. Del here. I'm sorry I can't be with you today in class, but I had some childcare issues that I had to take care of here at home. So I'm sorry, it's 2 weeks in a row at the end of the week that I haven't been in class. I'm well aware of that, and I'll try to do better. So anyway, listen, I still think that we can take care of the small amount of information that I'd like to get through to you today so we can stay on track. I promise I will not talk to you for very long on this. If you look at the timestamp on this, I promise it won't be very long. But we are talking about cells. You have a cell project that's going to be due on November 3rd, and I didn't want to skip out on at least getting you started with some of the different parts of the cell. So listen, there's not many plates for me to go over today. In fact, I think it's only like 2 or 3 plates, but it's going to be chock full of vocabulary. And I think it's kind of important that you know the vocabulary. So for those of you that are watching on screen right now, okay, all I'm going to talk about today is the outside of the cell, okay? Essentially the part of the cell that kind of separates it from the rest of the environment. So if you were thinking of a basketball, I'm just talking about the skin of the basketball, if you will. If I was talking about a tennis ball, I'm just talking about the yellow of the tennis ball. That's essentially the cell membrane. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. It's just the outside of the cell. So if you look at the cell membrane, and I'm looking over here, I always think it looks like just a big mattress from a bed. But if you notice, when you look at the mattress, it actually has 2 layers to it. That's why they're kind of like splitting it open. It really kind of just looks like this. But for the purpose of taking a peek at this, the picture here kind of like splits the cell membrane open. Just to be clear about this, where the marker is right now, this would be the outside of the cell, okay? And this would be the inside of the cell. This is where all the organelles are inside of a eukaryotic cell. But what I want to talk about right now is just the actual membrane itself. If you remember from our biochemistry unit, the membrane is made of a special type of molecule called a phospholipid. There it is right there. And again, I think I said this to you before. It kind of looks like a sperm cell with 2 tails, right? The head is made of a phosphate group. This phosphate group is polar. You might remember the word polar because it's similar to water. Water is also polar. Polar molecules can mix with polar molecules. And so if you think of this as like the outside of the cell, you can see all the phosphate groups, which are polar, are kind of mixing with the outside of the cell. And this is really important because we kind of want them to mix with the outside of the cell. Imagine if this was a blood cell, okay? And all of this outside of the blood cell was water. We want to be able to have some water transport molecules and kind of come into contact with the outside of the cell. Conversely, if you look at the very inside of the cell, so now I'm on the inside of the cell. Look at the inside of the cell. You can see the phosphate group, that's the little head there, is also facing towards the inside of the cell. This is important as well because the inside of your cell, not surprisingly, is also filled with lots of water. And that water can be a great transport mechanism to move molecules either within the cell or move molecules out of the cell. So the phosphate group right here, and then you can see a whole bunch of them right here, okay? That's a polar part of the cell membrane, and it mixes with water. On the inside of the cell membrane are the lipid tails. These tails are said to be nonpolar. It means they don't have any charge distribution to them, and they don't mix with water. And if that's scary to you, don't let it be scary, because think about this. You kind of already know this. If this is a lipid, it kind of should remind you a little bit of like salad dressing. And how in salad dressing, the oil of the salad dressing and the water of the salad dressing, they don't really mix. So this kind of prevents water from just freely blowing into the cell or blowing out of the cell. So this double membrane, it's called a double membrane because you have one part of it here and one part of it here, kind of allows the cell to stay separate from its environment. It has a polar head, okay, which can mix with water, but then it has these non-polar tails, which kind of prevent lots of molecules from just going in and out of the cell. Excuse me. The polar heads are said to be hydrophilic. It's a vocabulary word. It just means that they can mix with water. The nonpolar tails are said to be hydrophobic. They don't mix with water. What this means then is that the cell membrane is said to be selectively permeable. That's this big word up here, 2 words up here. And all it means is it lets some molecules in and it kicks other molecules out. And what I want you to know for right now is this. If you're a really small molecule, like carbon dioxide or oxygen, and even water, you're small enough that you can actually squeeze right through these heads and tails, and you can go right in and out of the cell. Okay? Small molecules tend to go right in and out of the cell. Okay? Now, the question you should be asking then is, well, how do larger molecules get into the cell? That's how we see these integral proteins or transport proteins. I'll talk about them in just a second. Sorry, I had to stop the recording there. I had to go yell at my kids for making too much noise upstairs. So anyway, this is the cell membrane. Looks like this double mattress here. It has these phosphate heads, lipid tails. It's got this polar outside and this polar inside. But either way, we can get small molecules in and out of the cell. And so, even though I'm not there to write it down with you, that's okay. Why can carbon dioxide and oxygen pass through the cell membrane? It's because they're really small and they can just squeeze right through the phospholipid bilayer. Okay, this is just a little closer look at the cell membrane. Again, if this is the cell membrane, we would say that this would be the outside of the cell. This would be the inside of the cell. Okay, small molecules can slide right through the cell membrane, but look at this. Other molecules can use these types of proteins to move in and out of the cell. Okay, these proteins are called transport proteins. Okay, and what they do is they allow other larger molecules, you can think glucose, to get in and out of the cell. Okay, now if you look also at this cell membrane, there's some other players that I'd like you to know. Sticking out of the cell membranes, okay, are these things that are receptors. They're made of glycoproteins. I might hammer you on that when we talk about the cell membrane in more detail, but not right now. I just want you to know that it has some receptors that stick out of it, and those receptors can like grab molecules like hormones, and they can attach to them, and then those molecules can tell the cell what to do. We talked already about carrier proteins or transport proteins that allow molecules to go in and out of the cell. So if you're a large molecule like glucose, maybe you remember making that model, we can have glucose outside the cell and then it can slide through one of these transport proteins and go inside the cell. Okay? There's also enzymes on the cell membrane that can help break molecules down. It's a really good one. It's a scary word, CAM, cellular adhesion molecules. Just on the cell membrane itself, you can have like these little bits of glue and it helps one cell stick to another cell. Okay? There's also other markers that stick off the cell that kind of look a little bit like receptors, but what they do is they can tell other cells like, hey, I'm this type of cell, and it allows cells to kind of communicate with one another, which is kind of interesting. Also in your cell, if you look right here, you can see there's some cholesterol in your cell, and that just helps stabilize the cell membrane. Okay, so this is going to be our last thing for the day. Sorry it ended up taking about 10 minutes, but what are the two types and functions of the membrane proteins? Look, we can just go back and take a look. I asked you for just 2 of them. Okay, some of these proteins can act as receptors in the cell. That might be one thing you might want to write down. Some act as transport proteins that can allow molecules to go in and out of the cell. Okay. There's other molecules called peripheral proteins. I'm not going to get into them right now. I think the 2 things that you should probably write down would be this. 2 types of functions of membrane proteins. They can act as receptors, which can like catch molecules and bring them into the cell. They can also transport molecules in and out of the cell. So there it is. That's the cell membrane. That is one organelle, and an organelle that you can use for your cell project. Okay, so I hope this made sense. As usual, Mr. Dell talked longer than I thought I was going to, but I hope I talked in a way that wasn't too fast for you guys and helped you get just a basic idea of the cell membrane. We'll go over a little bit more of the vocabulary when I come back into school on Monday. If I don't see you, have a great weekend. I'm going to ask you to color in the plant cell today. If you look on Schoology, you'll see a picture of the plant cell. All you have to do is just recreate that and color that in. I'll check the animal cell and the plant cell on Monday. Thanks a lot for listening, and have a great weekend.